Radicalism, in its literal Latin meaning, originally meant going to the root. So radicals don't merely prune or address things at the surface of the society. They attempt to go all the way down. They are advocates of a wholesale social transformation. And this is what gets to our analysis in this book of the defining condition of radicals, because radicals, in seeking such ambitious social changes, are necessarily on the margin of the political consensus of their day. This is why radicals often look irrational or extreme or utopian. And yet, time and again in American history, radicals have succeeded in catching waves of popular sentiment, organizing and mobilizing that, and achieving dramatic social changes. The most obvious example being the Black freedom movement of the mid-20th century, which against all odds upended the institutions of racist segregation in American jurisprudence and law. And it's still the case, of course, that there are deep-seated racial inequalities in American society, and radicals are seeking racial equality, but that legal revolution that we associate with the mid-century civil rights movement is a case in point. So in order to explain this, we have an analysis of margin and mainstream. We see the defining condition of radicals as both being on the margin necessarily, and yet at the same time needing to find roots to the mainstream. To tell the story of American radicalism, we open each chapter in our book with the life story of an individual radical, usually an unsung and unknown radical, to give an example of how it is that radicals in particular moments of American history have tried to negotiate this tension between their marginality and their mainstream aspirations. So, for example, in the chapter about the McCarthy period of the 1950s, which obviously was a period when American radicals felt their marginality very intensely, we open with two radicals, which we put against one another. They have much in common. Both of them are Trinidadian immigrants to the United States. Both of them are Black and are very opposed to the white supremacy they see in American society. Both of them are deported because of McCarthy-era political repression, and both of them end up living in London. One is C.O.R. James, an intellectual, and one is Claudia Jones. At the same time that they have much in common, they're also very different. Claudia Jones is a communist who looks to the Soviet Union as the lodestar of world socialism. C.O.R. James is a radical Democrat who sees Stalin's Soviet Union as a monstrous perversion of socialism. And so they're politically very much from different parts of the left. And this allows us, by comparing and contrasting them, to get at how American radicals on the whole, across the board, were really persecuted in the McCarthy period, and yet at the same time allows us to open a window onto the exciting debates about principle and analysis that American radicals had, because one of the great things about American radical history is the debates. And let me last but not least talk a bit about the scope of the book, because one of the distinguishing attributes of this book is that it's the first comprehensive history of American radicalism to continue the story past the 60s. The fabled New Left of the 1960s, Students for a Democratic Society, the Black Panther Party, and so forth. Many histories have taken radicalism through that period, but we tell the story of the 80s and the 90s down to the present in depth for the first time. So, for instance, we tell the story of eco-radicalism, of Earth First and ecofeminism. We tell the story of the Battle of Seattle and the revival of a kind of anarchist flourish in American left-wing thought and action. We tell the story of Occupy Wall Street most recently. And in so doing, we're talking about a period in which American radicalism is again on the fringes or the margins of the society, not really making many inroads as the conservative right gains a lot of sway in American society, and yet sometimes breaking through. An example being gay and lesbian radicalism, because ACT UP, the AIDS group, Queer Nation, and so forth, while on the margins, set the stage for the acceptance on a much broader level of same-sex marriage, for example, in American law, which breaks through into conventional politics during the Bush administration of all times. Again, a mainstreaming of ideas formerly thought marginal.